Imagine this. The one thing you believe will finally make a narcissist suffer might actually be exactly what they expect. Blocking them, begging them, sending one last emotional message, trying to prove your worth. None of it give you the power you think it does. But there is one response that completely changes the psychological equation. It doesn't involve revenge, it doesn't involve winning an argument, and it doesn't require you to say another word. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this single shift quietly dismantles the control they once had over you. Most people think the battle with a narcissist is happening through texts, phone calls, social media, or dramatic confrontations. It isn't. The real battle is happening inside your own nervous system. That's where manipulation begins. That's where confusion grows. And that's also where freedom starts. The biggest mistake people make is believing they must somehow convince the narcissist to understand the pain they've caused. They won't. Not because they're incapable of hearing words, but because accountability threatens the carefully constructed image they work so hard to protect. If you've ever wondered why every conversation leaves you more confused than before, why every attempt at closure creates more questions, or why walking away somehow feels harder than staying, then this video is for you. Because today, we're going to explore what really happens when you stop playing the game entirely. Many people believe that blocking a narcissist is the ultimate act of taking back control. While there are situations where blocking is absolutely necessary for safety, healing, or ending ongoing abuse, it is important to understand that the action itself is not what creates your power. The deeper question is whether the block reflects genuine emotional detachment or whether it is another move in an emotional struggle that still revolves around the narcissist. If you block them while constantly wondering if they noticed, if they are trying to contact you, or if they are finally regretting their behavior, your emotional energy is still tied to them. The physical distance may exist, but the psychological connection remains intact. This is why simply pressing a button rarely delivers the peace people expect. The mind continues replaying conversations, imagining future encounters, and searching for validation that may never come. The narcissistic relationship was built on keeping your attention focused on their reactions, and that pattern can continue even after communication stops. In many cases, the real challenge is not ending contact, but ending the emotional dependence on their approval, explanations, or acknowledgement. The most psychologically powerful shift happens when your decisions are no longer influenced by what the narcissist might think or do. Whether you choose to block them or leave the door technically open becomes far less important than reaching a place where their actions no longer dictate your emotional state. Your attention begins returning to your own life, your own goals, and your own healing. That internal shift changes the entire dynamic because your sense of stability no longer depends on their response, their silence, or their attempts to regain your attention.
When people have been hurt by a narcissist,
The natural instinct is to explain their pain, plead for understanding, or ask for one final conversation that will finally make everything clear. It feels reasonable because healthy relationships often improve through honest communication. But narcissistic dynamics operate very differently. Every attempt to beg, justify, or seek closure often communicates something the narcissist values more than your words. It tells them they still occupy a central place in your emotional world. Your continued pursuit reassures them that they can still influence your thoughts, feelings, and decisions.
this is why emotional appeals
So often end in frustration. Instead of responding with empathy, a narcissist may dismiss your feelings, change the subject, blame you for the conflict, or offer just enough kindness to keep you emotionally invested. The conversation stops being about resolving the issue and becomes another opportunity to maintain control over the emotional dynamic. You leave feeling unheard, while they leave knowing they still have access to your attention. Begging also creates an unhealthy imbalance. Without intending to, you begin placing your self-worth in the hands of someone who has repeatedly shown little interest in protecting it. The more you ask them to validate your experience, the more power you unknowingly give them to define your reality. This keeps you trapped in a cycle where every unanswered message, every delayed reply, or every cold response feels deeply personal.
Real healing begins
When you stop expecting the person who created the emotional wound to become the one who heals it. Closure is not something they grant through a perfect conversation. It is something you gradually build by accepting reality, trusting your own experience, and refusing to chase validation from someone who has consistently used it as a means of maintaining influence. One of the most important distinctions to understand is the difference between emotional detachment and emotional reaction. On the surface, two people may appear to be doing the same thing. Both stop responding to messages. Both avoid arguments. And both create distance. Yet internally, they are in completely different psychological states. One person is silently waiting for the narcissist to notice, to apologize, or to come back. The other has genuinely shifted their focus away from the narcissist and toward rebuilding their own life. The behavior may look identical, but the emotional reality is not. Narcissistic relationships often condition people to react rather than reflect. Every criticism, every mixed signal, and every unexpected moment of affection trains the nervous system to stay alert. You begin monitoring their moods, anticipating their next move, and adjusting your behavior in hopes of preventing conflict or earning approval. Over time, this constant emotional vigilance becomes exhausting, yet it also becomes familiar. Even after the relationship ends, Your mind may continue reacting as though the narcissist is still directing your emotional world.
Emotional detachment interrupts this pattern.
It does not mean becoming cold, uncaring, or emotionally numb. It means recognizing that your peace no longer depends on their opinions, their validation, or their unpredictable behavior. Instead of asking, "What are they thinking?" you begin asking, "What do I need?" Instead of analyzing every message or silence, you invest that mental energy into your own recovery, relationships, and personal growth. This shift is powerful because it removes the narcissist from the center of your psychological landscape. They may continue using familiar tactics to provoke guilt, curiosity, or hope, but those tactics lose much of their influence when your emotional stability is no longer connected to their actions. Your attention becomes your own again, and with it comes the freedom to make decisions based on your values rather than your reactions.
Silence has a very different meaning in a narcissistic relationship than it does in a healthy one.
Most people assume that if they stop reaching out, the other person will eventually reflect, recognize the loss, and become curious about what went wrong. That expectation comes from relationships built on empathy and mutual concern. A narcissist, however, often interprets silence through the lens of control, status, and emotional influence rather than genuine emotional connection. Their first concern is often not, "How is this person feeling?" but "What does this mean for my ability to access their attention?"
This is why silence can produce unexpected reactions.
Some narcissists may immediately attempt to reestablish contact with unexpected affection, apologies, or nostalgic messages. Others may act completely indifferent, quickly redirect their attention elsewhere, or even try to provoke a response through indirect means. These reactions are not necessarily signs of deep reflection or personal growth. More often, they are attempts to understand whether the usual emotional dynamic can still be restored. The mistake many people make is interpreting every response as proof that the narcissist has finally changed or suddenly realized their value. In reality, silence simply removes the predictable pattern they had grown accustomed to. When someone who was consistently available becomes emotionally unavailable, the familiar script no longer works. That uncertainty can motivate new behaviors, but new behaviors should never be confused with lasting transformation.
Your silence is most powerful when it is not used as a strategy to make the narcissist react. If silence becomes another way of secretly waiting for them to chase you, then your emotional focus is still centered on their behavior. Genuine silence reflects an internal decision to stop participating in unhealthy cycles. Whether the narcissist notices, responds, ignores it, or attempts to regain contact becomes secondary because your emotional direction is no longer determined by their interpretation of your absence. If this discussion is helping you understand patterns you've struggled to explain, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment with the word freedom. It tells me you're choosing clarity over confusion and investing in your own emotional well-being. Let's continue. One of the greatest misunderstandings after leaving a narcissistic relationship is believing that your recovery depends on figuring out what the narcissist is doing, thinking, or feeling. It is easy to become consumed with questions like, have they moved on? Do they miss me? Or will they ever regret what happened? These questions seem harmless, but they quietly keep your attention locked onto the very person you are trying to escape. Your mind remains occupied by their choices instead of your own growth, allowing the emotional bond to continue long after the relationship has ended. Attention is one of the most valuable psychological resources you possess. Wherever you direct it, your emotions, energy, and mental focus naturally follow. Narcissistic relationships often train you to prioritize the other person's needs, moods, and reactions above your own. You become skilled at monitoring their emotional state while slowly losing touch with your own. Even after the relationship ends, this habit can persist, making it difficult to reconnect with your identity outside of the relationship. Reclaiming your attention means intentionally shifting your focus back to yourself. Instead of tracking whether they viewed your story or wondering if they are talking about you, you begin asking different questions. What activities bring you peace? Which friendships deserve more of your time? What goals have been neglected while you were emotionally consumed by the relationship? These questions redirect your energy toward rebuilding rather than revisiting the past. The remarkable effect of this shift is that your emotional world becomes less reactive and more intentional. You stop measuring your progress by the narcissist's behavior and start measuring it by your own increasing sense of calm, confidence, and self-respect. As your attention returns to your values, your health, and your future, the narcissist gradually loses the central role they once occupied in your mind, creating space for a life that is no longer defined by their presence or absence. One of the most significant shifts you can make after leaving a narcissistic relationship is becoming emotionally unpredictable, not by playing games, but by no longer responding according to the patterns that once kept you trapped. Narcissistic dynamics often rely on predictability. Over time, the narcissist learns what will make you explain yourself, defend your intentions, forgive too quickly, or chase after reassurance. They begin to anticipate your reactions and use that knowledge to maintain influence. The relationship becomes less about genuine connection and more about managing your emotional responses. When you always react in familiar ways, the cycle remains intact. If criticism always leads you to seek approval, or silence always pushes you to reach out first, the narcissist can rely on those patterns. They do not need to know exactly what you are thinking because they already know how you are likely to respond. That predictability gives them a sense of control, even if you are no longer together. Becoming emotionally unpredictable does not mean acting impulsively, withholding affection to manipulate, or trying to make the narcissist jealous. It means your decisions are no longer driven by fear, guilt, or the need for their validation. Sometimes that may look like not replying immediately. Other times, it may mean declining to explain yourself, refusing to engage in circular arguments, or calmly maintaining boundaries without defending them. Your actions become guided by your own values rather than by their expectations. This change can feel unfamiliar because you are no longer operating from survival mode. Instead of constantly scanning for signs of conflict or trying to prevent the next emotional upheaval, you begin responding with intention rather than reflex. The narcissist may find this confusing because the old script no longer works. But the true value of this shift is not in how they react. It lies in the fact that your emotional life is no longer organized around anticipating or managing someone else's behavior, allowing you to rediscover a sense of stability that comes from within rather than from external approval. When a narcissist no longer receives emotional fuel, the dynamic of the relationship begins to change in ways that are often misunderstood. Emotional fuel refers to the attention, admiration, conflict, reassurance, fear, or emotional intensity that keeps you psychologically engaged with them. It does not matter whether the attention is positive or negative. An argument, a heartfelt apology, repeated explanations, or desperate attempts to be understood can all reinforce the connection because they confirm that the narcissist still occupies a powerful place in your emotional world. When that steady stream of emotional engagement begins to disappear, the narcissist may respond in different ways. Some may suddenly become unusually charming, apologetic, or affectionate. Others may criticize you more intensely, provoke jealousy, spread rumors, or attempt to create situations that draw you back into conflict. These behaviors can appear contradictory, but they often serve the same purpose: testing whether they can still influence your emotions and regain the familiar dynamic that once existed. It is important not to interpret these reactions as evidence of deep personal change or lasting remorse. Temporary kindness after losing influence is not the same as genuine accountability. Real change requires consistent self-awareness, empathy, and a willingness to accept responsibility over time, not simply a shift in tactics when access to attention becomes limited. The most meaningful transformation actually occurs within you. As you stop providing emotional fuel, your mind becomes less occupied with anticipating the narcissist's next move. You begin sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and making decisions based on your own priorities instead of constant emotional survival. The relationship gradually loses its psychological grip because your attention is no longer feeding the cycle. The greatest mistake people make after a narcissistic relationship is believing the final victory comes from changing the narcissist. It doesn't. It comes from changing the relationship you have
with yourself. The moment you stop chasing explanations, stop measuring your worth by their attention, and stop waiting for them to become the person you hoped they would be, you begin taking back the one thing they never should have controlled: your peace. Whether you choose to block them, maintain strict boundaries, or simply refuse to engage is a personal decision based on your circumstances. What truly matters is the reason behind that decision. If it comes from fear, anger, or the need to provoke a reaction, the emotional bond is still alive. But if it comes from clarity, self-respect, and a commitment to your own well-being, you've already started to break free. Remember, the opposite of manipulation isn't winning the game. It's refusing to play it. The opposite of emotional dependence isn't revenge. It's emotional independence. And the opposite of seeking validation from someone who repeatedly withheld it is learning to recognize your own value without asking for permission. If this message resonated with you, subscribe for more insights into narcissistic behavior, emotional recovery, and healthy boundaries. Leave a comment below with the words, "I choose peace," to remind yourself that your future no longer depends on someone else's approval. Share this video with someone who may still be trapped in a cycle of confusion, because sometimes one clear perspective can become the first step toward lasting freedom. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.